So let's get started with some hip circles. Start with your feet hip width apart and then push your hips through a circle. So you're going to push back to the side, to the front, and to the other side. Make sure you're keeping a little bit of a bend in your knee as you're doing this one. All right, we're coming up on knee circles next. So as you finish that last hip circle, bring your feet together, knees together, and then slowly start making little circles with the knees. And if you have any knee pain with this one, you can skip this step, but this is generally safe for most people's knees. And now shift your weight into one foot, lift your other foot off the ground, and let's do some ankle circles, 5 in each direction. And make sure you switch directions here, and then switch legs, so you're getting 5 in each direction. Our next warm-up exercise is the air squat. So you're simply sinking your hips back and squeezing your glutes to come up. I'm showing here poor form, which is when your knees start to cave inwards. So make sure that your knees are driving outwards the whole time you're doing this exercise. And your arms are acting as a little bit of a counterweight, so they can be out in front of you or they can come up overhead. And again, I'm showing the last one there was bad alignment, so don't let your knees come too far forward over your toes. Think about getting your hips back. Here we're going to do some walkouts. So this is a full body exercise. It's going to warm up the hips, the knees, the shoulders, and the core. So you're basically trying to keep your legs fairly straight. They can have a little bit of a bend in the knee, and you're walking your body out and back up to the top. So when you come to a plank position here, some people like to dip their hips a little bit, and some people like to hold more of a plank position. So do what feels good for your body. And you've just got one more of these here. Let's try to get about 5 walkouts in. And then let's move on to the next exercise. So you've got the band looped around your knees, right above your knees. And you're just going to walk forward and walk back. So I'm just showing this for about 5 steps here because of the camera angle, but try to get 20 steps forward and 20 steps back. And the same thing with this one, the side steps. You're going to do 20 side steps in each direction and then switch. And so I'm just showing this so you can get an idea of the form, even though I'm only doing a few steps in each direction. Main idea here is you really want to drive your knees outward against the band and keep tension on the band the whole time. I'm going to show you in a moment here what happens when you let your knees ease up on the tension. And so this happens here. So you're still stepping to the side, but you're not driving your knees out. So really think about squeezing the glutes to drive the knees out and continue with that one. Last exercise here is the good morning exercise. The dowel here is optional. You can always put your hands on your hips, but basically you're going to hinge at the hips, sink your hips back, and squeeze your glutes to come up. You want to have your legs fairly straight. My hamstrings are really tight, so it looks like they're not very straight here, but do your best to have straight legs and push your hips out behind you. So for workout A, we're going to start the gluteal portion with side-lying clamshells. So you want to put the band right above your knees and then lie on your side with your head either resting on a pillow or in your hand. And you're going to bring your knees up to about 60 degrees of flexion. So what that means is not bringing your knees all the way up so that they're at the same point as your hips, but bringing your knees most of the way up, kind of like how I have it here. You're going to keep your heels touching, and you're going to squeeze the outside of the glute to push against that band. So we're just showing on the other side here, heels are together, the toes can open up a little bit like a clamshell. And the main thing here is you want to make sure you don't roll that top hip too far back. So I could be doing a little bit better of a job here if you could take my top hip and rotate it about an inch towards the screen. That would be a little bit better. I would get a little bit more activation. And you're welcome to do this against a wall too. Sometimes having that cue of the wall touching your back can help you prevent from rolling backwards. And then moving on to the glute bridges here, you want to do about 3 sets of 20 with these ones. And it helps to set your heels up pretty close to your glutes. So sometimes you're going to slide a little bit depending on the surface that you're on, and you may need to reposition once or twice as you go through this exercise. But you want to think about coming up to a nice flat board position at the top so your core is engaged, your glutes are squeezed, and you're all the way up at the top there, nice and straight. And for the feet elevated glute bridge, you're going to use the same positioning as the glute bridge that we previously did, except for this time your feet are going to be up on a box or a small table. Same thing applies here. You want to think about really squeezing the glutes at the top of the motion. If you can pause and hold it there for a moment, that's even better. And you'll notice that I'm not touching my butt all the way down to the floor. So for many people, if you touch your butt all the way down to the floor, it's going to create a little bit of pain in the low back. And we don't need to do that. We have plenty of tension on the glutes just by coming to that point right there and then popping back up. So if you're one of those people that's having that low back pain, just try lifting your glutes a little bit higher and not actually touching down between reps. And you'll notice I'm pushing with my heel into the surface, and that can make you slide backwards a little bit depending on the surface that you're on. So I'm holding my hips here just to get my shirt out of the way so you can see my form. But if you're doing this one at home and you find that you're slipping, it can be nice to hold onto the floor with your palms, right? So palms down to get a little bit of a grip on the floor. Or if you're using a mat, you can grab onto the sides of the mat so that you're not going to slide backwards too far towards your head. You may notice that your right side is a lot easier than your left side or vice versa, and that's really common in this exercise. It'll show you pretty quickly if you have a weak glute. I want to clarify the focus of this exercise. Oftentimes we see people doing a similar exercise as a cardio exercise, right? We're stepping up to get the heart rate up, stepping up, stepping down, stepping up, stepping down. But this version here is a slow, controlled step up, and it's designed to really target the glute maximus, the main glute muscle. So as you can see, each time I push into my heel to lift my body up, well, we're going to shift sides here. I'll show you on the next side. But each time you make that contact with the heel right there, think about the glute activating, right where the glute meets the hamstring. Feel that firing and then push through your heel to come up to a standing point. And when you come up to standing, you want to think about squeezing your core, squeezing your glutes, and finding stability. And so I'm showing you the front view here so you can see what your knee is supposed to be doing. You want the knee not to cave in like that. You want it to track right over the second and third toes. All right, so just check that alignment in a mirror if possible as you do this exercise. And this is just a quick clip to follow up with what it's supposed to look like on the front view. You see how my hip's dropping down there? And then when I do it this time, my hip is really steady. My hip is steady. Oh, and then it drops down. So if that side of the glute is weak, that's what's going to happen. So I'm doing that on the other side, nice stable hip. And if the hip were weak, boom, the hip just drops down like that. So try to find nice strong hip at the top of that step up position. Think about your body being straight like a board here and not dipping down or lifting up at the hips. Come back to a nice straight position, push through your elbows, engage your shoulders, and here's a knee variation in case you don't want to do the full variation. And we're going to go right into side plank here. I didn't film 30 seconds of these, but I just wanted to show you a few form ideas here. This is how you can drop down to the knee to modify, and maybe even do like a few little hip lifts with the knee down as a modification. And we're going to show the same thing over here. So side plank, really push to the shoulder. You want your elbow right underneath your shoulder. And if you want to make it harder, you lift a leg. If not, just come back to this position right here and hold for 30. And we're going to show a knee variation too, just support right there, or you can add the little up down here. This is kind of a medium version between the beginning and the advanced version. From the side plank position, to add toe taps front and back, you can stabilize with your top hand on your hip and try to keep that top leg as straight as possible. Mine's got a little bit of a bend to it here. I've got some tightness, but the straighter you can keep the leg, the better. The main idea is to not let that top hip rotate too far forward and back. You want to keep that pretty steady as you tap the toe back and forth. And for the side lying leg lifts, the biggest form issue here is we tend to roll too far back onto our backs. And when that happens, the leg spins outward and we end up using the quad, the front of the thigh, to do most of the work instead of the side of the glutes. So make sure that your top hip is rotated forward such that your hips are stacked. If we could take a dowel and position it vertically, it would go right through your two hips. And this is just showing another place that you can put your head if you don't like to be posted up onto your elbow. You can support your head with your hand or with a pillow. So remember, this exercise is designed to target the medial glute, gluteus medius. And so if you feel this exercise in your quadricep, that means that your top hip has rolled back too far. So reposition those hips and keep going. These are the frog pumps. So you're lying on your back and you've got the soles of your feet touching, and then you're squeezing your glutes to come up. So you can do these with your head on the ground, but you're going to get more glute activation if you can tuck your chin to your chest and then squeeze the glutes at the top. If this hurts your neck, you can always put a pillow or a Bosu ball or some support under your head. But main idea, keep your feet touching and squeeze your glutes at the top. Now I'm showing you this little scoot here. You know, it's not the smoothest movement, but I want to illustrate that you want to have your butt really close to your box or your bench before you start this exercise, or you're going to be too far out. Okay, so once you've scooted into position, you want to go ahead and get your feet up onto the top of the box. So it's my heels that are pushing down into the box. This isn't the same as the glute bridge exercise where you're pushing into the box. Right now, it's just my heels pushing in. And I'm going to just tuck my shirt out of the way here so you can see what's happening. You actually don't need to lift up too high on this exercise. It's really those first few inches of movement that are going to get the most activation for the hamstrings. So the hamstrings are right along the back of your thigh, and that's where you should be feeling this exercise. Right now we're going double leg. We're about to shift into single leg. And so if you start to do a few reps on one leg, and you start to notice that your hips are becoming uneven and the opposite hip is dropping down, I want you to regress this and go back to the double leg variation until you build up enough strength to switch over to the single leg. So there's no point in cranking out lots of reps on one leg with poor alignment. So you can see my hip is kind of shifted over to the side there just to show you that. And we're going to switch legs, get the other side. And as with the glute bridge exercise, you're going to find out pretty quickly if you have a weak hamstring, because it's going to be a lot harder on one side than it is on the other side if you do have that weakness. And we're not using a band for this exercise. And again, you want to feel it in the back of the thigh. All right, coming to the donkey kickback exercise here. I was just showing you there, you want to make sure that you don't overarch your back. So you want to have as flat of a back as you can, and then squeeze your glute to lift your heel up towards the ceiling. And if you find that you're kicking back, if you're kicking the wall behind you, then try to bend your knee a little bit more and really push your heel up towards the ceiling. You'll notice I'm keeping about a 90-degree bend in my knee throughout the entire motion. And this could be a nice little stretch afterwards going into child's pose. You might need to widen your knees a little bit. It'll be a little bit more comfortable. For this exercise, we are showing the bird dog exercise. So we've moved on into the core portion of this workout. And I was doing a little bit of a cat-cow there just to kind of find neutral spine. So you want to make sure you're not overarched through the back and you're not really rounded through the back. Then I'm just kind of playing with my position here, trying to feel if I'm actually reaching straight back with my leg or if my leg is really bent. So once I've got the positioning right, it's opposite arm, opposite leg. You want to think about pulling your belly button up in towards your spine and really getting long. So if you could stretch out your body as long as possible there, that would be better than trying to reach up as high as possible. And if you can, really push through your heels. All right, shifting over to the dead bug exercise. So what I'm showing you here is anterior pelvic tilt, posterior pelvic tilt, anterior pelvic tilt, posterior pelvic tilt. You want to keep that posterior pelvic tilt. Maintain that position, make sure you can breathe. If you can't breathe, that starting point right there, that's your work. That's your exercise for 30 seconds. If you're able to breathe and maintain that nice back position, then this is your exercise. So we're going to do opposite arm, opposite leg, and here I'm showing some variations. So you can start with just doing the leg portion, you can start with just doing the arm portion, And then we're going to work to doing opposite arm, opposite leg. If your low back pops off the mat at all, we're going to cut the range of motion shorter. If your low back is able to stay into the mat and your abs are engaged, it's all good. You can continue with this exercise, opposite arm, opposite leg. Here I'm showing a shortened range of motion. So if it's too much on your low back to reach your leg all the way out, we're going to change it to heel taps. That's going to feel a lot better on your low back than trying to push through something that's too much for right now. And this is just a nice stretch to do at the end. Straighten your arms up over your head, legs long. It'll stretch out the abs a little bit. And then another little stretch for the back, chin to chest. And then moving on to some other core work. So these are the sideline hip raises. So you've got your knee touching down and your forearm touching down. And you're really working the bottom hip here as you squeeze up. So the rest of the body is just kind of holding this position. You'll notice my top leg isn't really moving all that much. It's just trying to stay as straight as possible. That bottom hip is doing all the work